Me dearios, it's David McGillivray here, and this is Little Did You Know. I've been doing it for 30 weeks and I still can't remember the title. It's a show in which I talk to people I find interesting, and I hope you agree. Now, this week is episode 2 of my tribute to the film director Norman J. Warren, who died earlier this year. He was probably my oldest friend in the film business. Last week we spoke to Adrian Smith, whose book about Norman is coming out later this year. My guest today is a comedian. You'll know him for The Infinite Monkey Cage, which he has co-presented on radio for ages, and later this year it's back in the theatres. But it turns out, as I discovered, that my guest is a fan of Norman's as well. And he's going to devote an episode of his podcast, An Uncanny Hour, to Norman very shortly. I've learned so much about my guest in recent years. We haven't been friends in quotes for all that long, and in fact we've never really met, only virtually. But there's going to be no shortage of stuff to talk about, I can assure you. We're going to talk about Norman, we're going to talk about science and comedy and more besides, not just here on YouTube, but also on Patreon. If you're a subscriber, please join us there at the end of the show. You'll find us waiting for you. If you're not a subscriber, here's the link. It's so easy to join, and recently people have been most impressed by the videos we're putting on Patreon. They now include the first film that Norman ever made. Enough of that. Let's move on to my guest. Please say hello to the very wonderful Robin Ince.
Hello, it's lovely. Do you know what? It feels like a good day to be talking to you because I'm currently just round the corner from Charles Hawtrey's house. And I just had to explain to a Liverpudlian workman about the history of Charles Hawtrey, and that bit where you're not quite sure, when you explain that he was banned from nearly all the pubs in Deal, you're not sure how far you should go with the details on a first-time conversation.
I didn't know you were in Deal. I have to say that the subject of Charles Hawtrey being banned from every pub in Deal has come up before on this programme. Now, I've been given wrong information. I was told that you're in Berkhamsted in Hertfordshire.
But I've moved very quick. This weekend, I suddenly took the advantage that we were actually allowed to move, and so not only did because I come down to Deal quite a lot, but I also just picked up from the Oxfam here this Vincent Price Treasury of American Art for £2.49. One of the other reasons I always come to Deal, because I find treats like that.
You're a bibliophile, I know that, Robin. I was in Deal only a few weeks ago, interviewing a guest who's going to be one of my guests shortly. I was very impressed with Deal. Very nice high street.
Yeah, it's got that nice mix where it's not been overly gentrified. There are, the gentrified kind of shops, but there's a lovely. Did you get the chance to go into the Kent Museum of Moving Image?
No, it was closed down.
They have one of the, and apparently this was a toy that came out. I forget the name now. You'll remember this. You remember Michael Redgrave? There's in Dead of Night. I forget the name of his vent dummy in that, but they have a toy version of that was apparently made in the late 40s, so you could have your own possessed ventriloquist doll.
No.
Yeah, it's the first time I'd ever seen it. One of those wonderful little museums run by two people who are incredibly passionate, and both of whom have worked in some way within the film industry. And it just has drawers everywhere that you can kind of open and go, my goodness, what is that? Or these old front of house stills for, David Lean epics and things like that. I think you'd enjoy it.
Oh, I'm going to come back to Deal. I'm promising you now. Robin, not so long ago, I'm talking about, I reckon, 2 to 3 years, Norman emailed me and he told me he'd been at a festival in Wales and he'd met a very nice comedian called Robin Ince. And I said, well, I know Robin Ince because sometimes I review his programmes for Radio Times. Look, there's one there, Laws That Aren't Laws. We're going to come back we're going to come back to that. But tell me, Robin, can you recreate that moment for us when you first met Norman? Was that the first time you'd met him?
Yes, I only met him once. We had 3 to 4 days together in Aberystwyth. We were on the same local line train with John Scott as well, the great composer, who of course did a lot of Norman's films as well. And we only met as we got off, as you should. We got off on the darkened platform, not of Aberystwyth, for the line was closed that day. So we got off at Machynlleth, and there we were, just standing on the, and then a lovely goth called Triss came up and said, I believe, and I actually said to him, I said, you're a goth and you're wearing, I can't remember which horror movie was on his chest at that time. I said, I presume you are our lift to Aberystwyth. And then he started the drive, and he was a huge fan, and is a huge fan of Norman's work. And of course, have that embarrassing thing where you think, oh my goodness, I'm driving someone that I really admire. And therefore you constantly go the wrong way in various different gyratory systems and go, I'm so sorry, this shouldn't normally take an hour and a half, until eventually it seemed like it could be a Misery style siege situation where he was never going to take us to, I should add as well, the hotel we stayed in also had a pet cemetery. So there was so much that was going on that was wonderful. But then Norman and I and John, you know, we had dinner together and we had breakfast together, and it was just, yeah, it was a joy, because as I think I've said to you before, one of the delights to me of Norman's films is I spent about 15 years only playing what I imagined they were in my head. As a 9-year-old, I would see some, you know, quite lurid images from Satan's Slave, for instance, which of course you wrote, and I would be building up what this film was. And Norman is one of the rarities, I think, of someone whose films from the publicity stills never let me down when I finally saw them. I find them joyous in a way that some films, I think, some of those films that did have to have that sex and violence to sell them can seem, I think, just nasty now, or a little, in fact, like you write about in Doing Rude Things, there are some things that just seem, the seaminess usurps any sense of anything else. Whereas with Norman's films, I think the joy of the man, somehow the delight of what it was like to be on the set, to have everyone working to the max and go, well, actually, can you be in the background scene? You're going to have all of those things really still come across to me in those films.
Well, we're going to talk about Norman's films in the second half of today's programme. But just before we move on, just tell me, Robin, what was the name of that festival in Wales?
It is Abertoir.
Oh, isn't that brilliant?
It is. And you know what's beautiful about it? I'm sure you've done many of the kind of, you know, the fan film festivals. Again, like the work of Norman, there is so much love. And it's you know, I don't know, 150 people maybe, and they all really properly love horror films. They're not people who've got into it because of Friday the 13th or whatever. You know, for them to see a version of The Flesh and the Fiends that hasn't been shown for 40 years is a delight. To get up at 8 in the morning to make sure you don't miss The Monster Club. The teeth are retractable when not in use. Of course, the great line from Vincent Price's Erasmus the Vampire. So yeah, it has a great pun, and it's a joyous festival.
Well, I mentioned earlier that I've discovered so much about you, Robin, that I didn't know. And certainly I had no idea at all that you were such a lifelong horror fan. I know you specifically because of your interest in science. Now, what I was surprised particularly to learn is that you started buying horror film books with tokens you were given. Were you as young as 8?
Yeah, I was 8 years old, and I bought the Alan Frank Pictorial History of Horror Movies. And then I had enough book tokens left that about a month later in Bushy Heath, on the way to see my gran in her maisonette, I got Dennis Gifford's book, and it just built and built and built. And it's an interesting thing. I don't know if you've ever found this, that sometimes you move away from something that you loved as a child, but you get to a certain age where you start leafing through those things again, and you realize that you no longer have to be, perhaps because as we get older, I'm a little bit embarrassed by my childish things. And then I did a show about the satanic rites of Robin Ince, which was at the Edinburgh Fringe, which was just my love of horror, just with literally stacks of books. And I just grab bits and pieces or old reviews from Monthly Film Bulletin, you know, those wonderful reviews where, well, you may well have had to do this, the bit where you go, well, how exactly do I describe this strange, you know, this Jess Franco movie, which is predominantly, you know, panning shots and then zoom ins of castles. It's kind of a rather dull film that's meant to be advertising Cyprus with occasional sapphic activity. And so just reading out from those aloud is a delight.
It's bringing it all back to me, Robin. Yes, I did review a few of those Jess Franco films. I think, was Succubus one of his? I'm pretty sure I did. Not so long ago on social media, you asked your friends and followers which was their first grown-up horror film that they saw, and you said that yours was The Hills Have Eyes. Now tell us, what is a grown-up horror film?
Well, I think the kind of the Roger Corman 60s films, Hammer, Amicus, they have a level of fun and a frock coat and lace to them, which means they don't, you know, the same. I mean, I would say Amicus has that interesting point in From Beyond the Grave, which I think is the most disturbing of the portmanteau films, in particular Angela Pleasance and Donald Pleasance playing father and daughter. But it is that bit where you see one of those films that really feels forbidden. And and something like Hills Have Eyes to me was my elder sisters bought it for me from some kind of weird auction, wishing to terrify me as they do, as older siblings like to do. And it really was, it wasn't anything like, because it felt real. That's one of the things I think about grown-up horror films, is they feel like they could really happen. Whereas Christopher Lee turning into a bat is, there is a level of escapism, whereas you don't feel you're escaping with The Hills Have Eyes.
Well, you were watching The Hills Have Eyes, and round about the same time, I must have watched my first grown-up horror film, which was Night of the Living Dead. Bit earlier, perhaps, but I've said in the past that was so real that when I came out of the cinema, I expected to see zombies walking down Piccadilly. Is that what you mean?
Yeah, it is. And I think that's a great example, because I still think that is a film which, however many times you watched it, it disconcerts. And that brilliant, I mean, so many parts of that film are to start off with a man spoofing Boris Karloff, which is basically saying, say goodbye to the coming to get you, Barbara, and all of that. And then suddenly you go, oh, the horror movies aren't. Again, much like, I suppose, Boris Karloff's, the film we did with Peter Bogdanovich, Targets, which is that whole thing of saying the horror movies have stopped being this fanciful world, and now the real world is beginning to encroach in them.
Let's talk about early influences, Robin. Something tells me that you must have been watching horror films late night on BBC TV, like so many of my guests. Yes.
Yeah, it was the first horror double bill series was that I saw, which I must have been, I think, maybe 10 by then, because of course your mum and dad could still pull out the aerial. So, in their room, so it's not like now where it would just be, and they used to allow me, they pretended that, because I inherited my grand's great, big, enormous old black and white television, and I was allowed to watch the black and white ones. So I think the first one I would have seen would have been in the series that started with Night of the Demon and the 1975 version of The Ghoul, which had a beautiful Radio Times cover as well with Peter Cushing on it. And I'm trying to work out whether that was the first horror I saw. It might have been The Pit and the Pendulum, the Roger Corman version, which is tremendous as well. But I always feel very envious of the League of Gentlemen, because they all lived in areas where they got Appointment with Fear on a Friday night. And unfortunately, I don't think the Thames/LWT region gave us such treats.
Didn't, alas. Now, what about your interest in science? Now, can you remember precisely when that developed?
Well, yeah, do you know what? I can't remember so much when it developed, but I remember when it went away, which is one of those things, which is Carl Sagan's Cosmos, the landmark TV series of, I think, 81. So I would have been 12 years old. I used to watch that with a friend of mine. I loved it. I was so excited by science. And then, like many people, I had that experience that in the secondary school system, science suddenly became, and I've actually talked to many, Carlo Rovelli, the brilliant physicist and really wonderful writer of science books as well. When I was talking to him, he said, oh, this obsession with levers and pulleys. And that happens, you get this obsession where you seem to just be taught about levers and pulleys. And so I kind of, somewhere around the age of 14, science and me departed, I was like, oh no, I'm going to just stay with the arts, I think. And so it was probably in my mid-20s, probably touring with Dave Gorman actually at the time. I bought a couple of science books, and also a book by James Randi, who was, of course, a great skeptic. And I bought James Randi's in fact, this you'll like. It was James Randi's Psychic Investigator, which I found in an antique shop in Lavenham, which you probably know as the great location for Witchfinder General. So it was this beautiful clash of witches and skepticism in this antique shop in Lavenham.
Oh, it's another place I want to go to. It's in Suffolk. Should I?
Yeah, do you know what? Because I think there's also, I'm trying to remember, there's another horror movie that's from the late 60s, which it's set in an antique shop, and that's in Lavenham as well. But it is, yes, it's rather delightful. Though I was annoyed recently, I've just been writing a book where I've been able to briefly touch on witchcraft, though predominantly it's about the end of the universe and natural selection, all those other things. But I always try and crowbar in some of my other interests. And as I was it is... sorry, I suddenly realised I distracted myself with too many thoughts and they all just stopped. It happens sometimes. I had my first gig, proper full-length gig back in Trowbridge a few days ago, and I suddenly realised where just all the thoughts come out and then suddenly they just stop. But no, it's a delightful place and it's a fascinating place. And I wish I could remember the name of the antique shop horror that's there. It's not, unfortunately, the one with Jack Palance. I don't know if you remember that, where Jack Palance and a voodoo doll, called something like Crazy or Crazed or Craze.
I think it's Craze. I think I reviewed it for the monthly film bulletin.
Well, I'll have that somewhere then. And what I love about that, and if anyone listening to this knows where I can find it, because it's not on YouTube now. Do you remember when the Milk Marketing Board had a series of adverts which were taken from movies? And for some reason, Craze, which I don't feel is really a child-friendly film for those who wish to, imbibe the pasteurized, there was Jack Palance. Stop. So he's there screaming, and then he has a lovely glass of milk. Drink milk.
I want to watch that commercial right now. I think it's program's finished. I may go onto YouTube and try and find it. And finally, Robin, your last major influence, comedy. You were coming to London as a teenager and going to comedy clubs. So, which clubs and which comics do you reckon were your major influence?
Well, I mean, the major one who I saw him live in a play. Rick Mayall. When I was 10, I saw Kevin Turvey, I think, kick up the 80s, and Alexei Sayle. They were the two on OTT, probably the late night version of Tiz was. And I do the thing about Rick Mayall in particular, and it's true of Alexei actually. I supported Alexei at the South Bank at Festival Hall. It was lovely actually. His agent or the live booker rather, tour manager who sadly died last year. He rang me up and said, I don't know if I should be asking this, but because he felt that I might be annoyed that I was asked to support someone. And he said, I just wondered if you think about supporting Alexei. I said, of course I bloody do. There's no, do you know what? You needn't have offered me money, because I think the moment your ego says, I'm afraid puppet show has to go beneath me, then it's just nonsense. And to be on with Alexei for 2 nights on the South Bank was fantastic. But I remember when Rick Mayall died, every night as I went on stage, I kept thinking, you have to remember, one of the things that Rick Mayall taught me was don't give everything. You have to always give. You look at that incredible 15 minutes that he does from the first comic relief show live at the Shaftesbury Theatre, where he comes on and he sings, do you love me? Do you think I'm great? Do you really like me? Would you like to see my pants? Right? You watch that, and just there's no sense of shortchanging. There is a sense of utter commitment. And I think that's what I probably got as well from watching those early days. And then once I started going, when I was a teenager, and I started going into the clubs, and they'd all become famous by then, I saw people like Jeremy Hardy and Phil Cornwall, who went on to be in Stella Street. And again, always about giving everything.
You did Celebrity Mastermind earlier this year. What was your specialty subject?
It was the young ones, yeah. And I totally forgot that the pig was called Bacon Sandwich on the episode of Bambi. So you know, I'm one of those people that, even though it went well in the end, Celebrity Mastermind, all I can remember are the errors. The failure to remember that the predominant element of chalk. One of the reasons actually is, I don't know if you've ever watched it, John Humphrey, his questions are so long that you know what the answer is in the first sentence. And by the time he's finished, you've totally forgotten and moved on to something else.
How terrifying was it before the programme began?
Oh, I had weeks of terror. I mean, I've turned it down for years. One of the reasons that I said yes was, of course, because last year with lockdown, I'd basically, you know, I created a lot of work online, but I would take anything that people asked me, and I had no alibis. I'd always before been able to say, I'm afraid I can't come to Belfast, I'm on tour. Whereas this time everyone knew no one was on tour. But it was that Grace Dent was on that show as well, the restaurant critic and author. And the way that her nervousness that came across was what I felt inside. One of the things that I've realized from years of doing different forms of kind of performances, wow, it's amazing what you hide and that the audience have no idea. And Mastermind was a great example where I got some phone calls after it came out. People went, oh, wow, you look really relaxed and assured. And I thought, oh, that's what happens, is the mask comes on and no one knows that inside you're going, geez, I think I'm going to get 0. I think I'm going to forget everything. I'm going to get absolutely nothing. Maybe I'm going to get 1. And then everyone's going to laugh and go, oh, we saw you on Mastermind. You only got 1. You know, I had those. It was like doing Just a Minute. The first time I did Just a Minute, I had nightmares for 2 weeks of seeing Nicholas Parsons' head just appear and saying, your subject is Toby Jugs. And me just seeing myself going, while Clement Freud buzzed in frenetically.
Oh, just tell us how you did in Celebrity Mastermind, Robin, please. Where did you?
I have a beautiful piece of glassware, of course. That yeah. So fortunately, I did win. I was. I knew there was a lot of pressure on as well, because Stuart Lee would have been furious if I'd been beaten by Joe Pasquale.
Oh, I knew you'd do well, Robin. We're going to have to take a break now. We're going to see a trailer for a horror film, of course, and it's got one of my all-time favourite titles. I'm going to have to read it because it's extremely long. It's Codependent Lesbian Space Alien Seeks Same. It's an homage to sci-fi films of the 50s. It's in black and white. Have a look at this and join us again in a couple of minutes.
You saw a spaceship.
And a note dropped out of the spaceship.
What did the note say?
It said, what are you doing later?
The sexiest alien on the planet Earth. I'm looking for action. Hot Earthling on alien action.
Now, where did you meet? What is her name?
Blinks.
Is it permissible for me to touch you? Holly, that is such a pretty name. I could say it 1,000,000 times. Holly, 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 Holly. Ha, ha, ha! The life I told you about was not mine.
Well, then what is it?
I'm a space alien. Holly, 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 Holly. I'm having fun. Codependent lesbian space alien. I have no hair on my head, but the pavement matches the concrete.
That is, and he refers to his notes again, codependent, lesbian, space, alien, seeks same. Now, some people find it's hilarious and some people don't, but that's what makes a cult, lovies. So seek it out and see what you think. I'm David McGillivray, and here with me is my guest, Robin Ince. We're going to be talking about Norman J. Warren in just a moment, but first of all, Robin, just for dolts like me, can you explain the meaning of the infinite monkey cage?
Do you know what the real meaning of it was? That Radio 4 said, why don't you call your show Top Geek? And therefore, I spent a day in my friend's house in Levenshulme in Manchester coming up with every single title that was not Top Geek. And amongst that, I just suddenly thought there's something about the Infinite Monkey Cage. It has a kind of rhythm to it. And then I suggested it to Brian and our producer Sash, and they went, oh yeah, we like that. And it's so what was great about it is for years we've had people questioning, is the cage infinite? Isn't it an infinite number of monkeys? I really think you can project what you want onto it. To me, in my mind, it was just this idea was the universe is this vast place and it's with so many possibilities, and we are these monkeys in them with this curiosity. And that was the kind of visual in my head. But I'm glad that, I mean, of course, we did get complaints before we even went out the first time. We had various letters saying we were promoting vivisection. And we used to write back and say, just so you know, an infinite monkey cage is roomy. But it's, yeah, it was just, for me, it was, and I think it's getting harder now. I think now more and more in TV and radio, they demand that you have a title that says, this is what this show is. And I reckon now, 12, 13 years on, they probably wouldn't let us call it Infinite. Even then it was a battle, but we said, look, I think this will work. I think this is it's a fun title and people will come to it.
But just to clarify, does it refer to monkeys with typewriters eventually writing Hamlet?
Maybe.
Oh, maybe we'll have to leave it there.
Well, do you know, it's whatever you have in your head. That's what I like is, if you might imagine there's an infinite number of you at this very moment, of course, in all the different kind of ideas of physics, and all of those infinite numbers of you are all having different ideas of what the infinite monkey cage is called. And of course, also there's an infinite number of monkey cages that is just a one monkey cage, a two monkey cage, a multiple cage, single monkey. There's a lot going on.
Let's move back to our friend Norman J. Warren, Robin. I want to know what you talked about for 4 days in Aberystwyth.
Do you know what with John, of course, what was fascinating, John Scott, was because Norman, what I thought was really delightful about Norman is there was so little ego there. He loved listening to other people. So very often we'd all just be sitting around and Gary Sherman was there as well, of course, directed Deathline. And he was down for breakfast as well. So with John, it was fascinating because once John started talking about music, of course, Norman would be joining in. And I'd forgotten that John Scott had done The Shooting Party, which I think is a really great 1980s British movie. I think is one of James Mason's, I think probably his penultimate performance. Beautiful, just one of his greatest performances. Fantastic scene with Gordon Jackson. So we would end up talking about lots of films that weren't Norman's films. We would go off in so many different places. Then every now and again, I'd ask Norman something about, Prey, which I think many people consider to be his best film. I mean, there's some. I do think Prey actually is a very, very good film. But I enjoy, as you know, I enjoy all three of those late 70s movies: Terror, Prey, and Satan's Slave. Inseminoid was fun to watch because John and Norman were there to show Inseminoid, and Inseminoid has such funny things in it. Like there's one point where I can't remember which. Oh, it's Rosalind Lloyd, I think, is in it, who was also in Wild Geese and various others. Is Rosalind Lloyd related to Ewan Lloyd? I'm not sure.
I don't know this name at all, Robin. Shall I look it it up while you're talking.
Yeah, you'd recognise her, and she's the croupier, I think, in Wild Geese, where Roger Moore comes in. When you told me, I said I'd never take drugs, and which of course Wild Geese has that wonderful thing where Roger Moore plays the Irishman and Richard Harris plays the Englishman, and Roger Moore, of course, no reason to do the voice, but yeah, Rosalind Lloyd, I think at one point she's basically being killed. And the guy inside the spaceship's going, "Come on, love, pull yourself together," which I just find there's a hilarious mix of kind of casual sexism during a scene of mutilation.
Well, beautifully timed there, Robin, because Rosalind Lloyd was, in fact, in Inseminoid, and she's the daughter of Ewan Lloyd. So we've learned something today. And I've learned that Inseminoid was being shown at Aberystwyth. And were you at times having to fight your way through the fans to talk to Norman? Because he was enormously popular at these conventions and festivals, wasn't he?
Well, Joe, the lovely thing again about Abertoir is it is one of those things where also people show such an enormous amount of respect to everyone. And I think what was lovely was, I think Norman had done it before, actually, because I'm not sure which film he brought up last time, because I think they actually, the focus of the Q&A afterwards was initially on John's soundtrack. And there was this wonderful queue of people with, I'm sure, again, you've seen it, you know, the strangest pieces of memorabilia, you know, the oddest bit of promo material. And part of the delight of watching it was seeing the delight of John and Norman's faces as, oh my goodness, I'd forgotten they'd made this very, very strange mask, this odd teacup, this whatever it might be. This lolly wrapper, Lion's Made Inseminoid lolly wrapper. That's not real, by the way, just in case suddenly people go, my God, my Inseminoid collection's not complete. But that was the delight. People would just pop over and they would ask questions, and a lot about the early work as well, the short films, the stuff that was on, oh man, I've forgotten it now, released by the BFI a few years back.
Private Hell.
Yes, Her Private Hell. You know, the early films are on that. And that was the lovely thing, is people, you know, again, really, they were proper deep fans in terms of where they wanted to go. So there were never dull questions that people wanted to ask. But it was, yeah, it was just lovely, because we were basically in Aberystwyth University Student Union, just sitting around having carrot cake and just chatting about, you know, and the sadness to me is that, you know, Norman, I think there was so much inventiveness that you could just see. And what a great pity that it was at a time where the British film industry was, exploitation was one of the few things. You either had the rarity of an enormous budget film in the journey towards Goldcrest, or you were just having to make exploitation movies. But it was odd, because I mentioned to you, you know, a while ago about sometimes when I watch Peter Walker's films, I do find they can just be a bit, you know, like, oh, there's something which, there's something can just seem a little bit too gritty. And then I watched Virgin Witch recently. Have you ever watched that?
Yes. Yes.
And that is, I mean, it's just basically a kind of a porn, well, not porn show. It's more like the man who used to do all the, whatever those, did the photographs for the Peanuts, you know, and people would go and buy peanuts from a pub, and they would have the nude woman, apparently nude woman behind. And each time you bought a packet of KP peanuts, a little bit more of the lady would be revealed. It felt to me like it was a cinematic version of a KP peanuts dispenser from a pub.
Well, here's a little bit of information for you, Robin. You probably know it anyway, but Virgin Witch and Norman's film Terror were shot in the same house.
It's a wonderful house, isn't it? I mean, that's what I love. One of the things that I love is when I was talking to Norman about the inventiveness, and I think the British horror industry was very inventive in terms of saying, we have this number of locations, how many angles and how many films can we get out of those angles? Because that's I think, was that house used in Terror as well?
Yes.
Yeah.
It was. Yes, and at that point, Robin, can I ask you, when you met Norman, had you seen any of his films before?
Oh yeah. I had. I'm trying to remember when I first saw Satan's Slave, and then about 15 years ago there was the Coffin series of Coffin, which was Peter Walker, Amicus, Tygon, and Norman. So I bought all those when they came out 15 years ago, and that would have been the first time that I saw Prey. And No, I had seen Terror before, because Terror, I think, came out on the Satanica of VHS. So I've seen that on VHS, and I used to have Satan's Slave on VHS as well.
Yes, you referred to coffins there. These were DVDs in coffin-shaped boxes. Wonderful. Now, did you subsequently catch up with other of Norman's films?
Well, of the ones I've seen Her Private Hell. I have seen. There's a very odd double bill. The one that I forget the name of it. It's not called Sex Mission, but it's the one that came out. Would it have been after Inseminoid? Very low budget one about some topless aliens that basically, I don't know if I'm allowed to say on this, but topless aliens who briefly interfere with very traditional male masturbators who, you know, the ones that you kind of almost picture in doing rude things when you talk about the audience. I can't remember what that film's called.
Yes, I'm afraid this is called Outer Touch. It's one of the films Norman made that I've never seen. Now, have you seen these other films that I haven't managed to catch up with? The others are Gunpowder and Bloody New Year.
I have seen Bloody New Year, yes. I've not seen Gunpowder. Bloody New Year I saw a while ago, and I know that Norman didn't have a great time. I think the producers, you know, they kind of gave him promises, and he was then working on zero budget, basically, wasn't he? There was it's one of those things that quite often when you look up cast members of certain films on IMDb and it says is best known for Bloody New Year, and it means nothing else. This was the one time that I think for completists, I can see why they would want to, but I think for me, Satan's Slave, Prey and Terror are tremendous fun. And then the earlier stuff, I think, is very interesting. The short films in particular, I think, show the possibility of someone far more influenced by the French New Wave in terms of beautifully, I mean, you know, the way the fairgrounds are shot and things like that. It was a really wonderful eye that he had. But that Outer Touch, I'll send you my copy because I don't need to watch it again, and you'll be very pleased to know it's on a double bill with a kind of melodrama written, I think, by the two people who wrote Crossroads. And it's set in a kind of I think it's called Sex Clinic, but it had a lot of different titles. And it also has Carmen Silvera in it from TV's A Lower Low, who I worked with in a musical with Ted Rogers and Sue Pollard once. My
goodness, it's a small world. Yes, you're referring to Clinic Exclusive with an X. I think I reviewed that as well. Oh, I'd love to see Outer Touch.
I will pop that in the post to you.
Robin, thank you. You're very good at popping things in the post, and we're going to talk about that on Patreon as well. Now, Bloody New Year was Norman's basically last feature film that he directed. Now, when you met him, was he at all wistful about the fact that he hadn't been able to direct a film for so long?
Do you know what? Not in the conversations we had, no. And I think that might have been because in that environment where he's surrounded by enthusiasts, I imagine that did really G him up. And but I think that was, you could see, I mean, it was wonderful about the way that he would talk about other people that he'd encouraged as well. And I think that says a great deal about someone. That one thing that I might have got a sense of wistful, but I never got a sense of bitterness in those 4 days. And I can imagine that for someone who had so much promise, and I really would say if anyone listening to this hasn't seen things like Satan's Slave and Prey and Terror, they're so much fun because they've just got so much going on in them. And and I love those moments where you just think someone went, we could get a shot from there. And if we do that, and then we hang that there. And that's what I love about the energy of his films, I think, is you get that sense of the behind the scenes energy. How can we get this shot? I think we could get away with it. And those are my favorite people, are people who are constantly fighting against limitations that they have and never go, we can just get away with this locked off shot or this pan. No, we're going to hang the camera over the stairs and lower it on this rope.
Well, Norman's films do turn up periodically, so you certainly can see the likes of Satan's Slave and Terror. I'm not sure about Prey. I'd love to see that again because you asked me this question, which is your favourite of Norman's films, and I said probably it has to be Prey because it works both as a sex film and a horror film.
Yeah, but also, to be fair, I'm going to stop because you didn't write the screenplay for that. And if anyone does have I think it's also on the recent release of Norman's films. Your director's commentary with Norman is hilarious and delightful because Norman is ebullient, and you can actually just hear yourself wincing, going, "Oh God, did I write that line? Oh God!" And it's a lovely double act. Because I think with Satan's Slave in particular, I don't think you'd seen it for quite a long time before you did that director's commentary.
No, I find it very difficult to not so much watch these films, but to listen to that dialogue. I do have a problem with that. So I'm glad you enjoyed it, Robin. It was agony for me. Did you keep in touch with Norman after you met him in Wales?
Yes, and of course, unfortunately, not long after it was lockdown. So, because this was November 2019, and then just before lockdown, I went out for lunch with John, and at that point, Norman, of course, his health was quite up and down, and then I sent him a few emails and was looking forward to the chance when this had all ended to meet up again. We certainly had plans. I was going to pop and see him, and it's one of those. I'm very fortunate because I have a lot of things that I find I'm particularly passionate about. And I just try as much as possible to get involved. I go, oh, let's make a show about this. Or I take lots of jobs which very often are nothing to do with the money. There'll be, that sounds like I might meet someone interesting. And like Abertoir was like, oh, this is right in the middle of a tour. I can't remember. I think I had to get from Aberystwyth to somewhere outside Leeds, some kind of 7-hour journey or 8-hour journey in the middle of a tour. But I knew it would be interesting. And I'm so pleased that I got the chance to meet Norman and John as well. And it's always, sometimes you're swearing the day before you have to go off. You go, what am I doing that for? It's a 14. Why am I Aberdeen to Penzance? And then you get there and you go, yeah, there's the energy you feed off is exciting.
Well, it's a mutual admiration time because Norman loved meeting you, Robin, and afterwards he referred to you a lot. He was still planning to make more films almost up until the time he died, which was great, and we spoke about that a lot. There is going to be a memorial. We still can't give any information about this at all because, of course, it's all in the air, but we reckon that it will happen when things go back to normal. Now, we're coming to the end of the show, Robin, so we must just talk briefly about what you've got planned. You've got a book coming out this year, The Importance of Being Interested. When is this?
I think it's out on the 6th of October. I've just had that terrifying thing, which I'm sure you've had, of a publisher saying, we need some quotes for the jacket blurb. Send this book to everyone you admire so they may well reject you. So I've got this, that terrifying thing where people like Carlo Rovelli and Chris Hadfield and Neil Gaiman and Alice Roberts, things like that, and hoping that, they don't have to make up an excuse and go, I'm so sorry I didn't get the chance to read it. But you sent me an email saying you'd started it. Oh, that must have been an error. Oh my God, they hate it. And the critics haven't even started. Is that terrible thing? You go, the critics haven't, they haven't even bothered. Because of course that happens. I think my last book, there was one mainstream review in the Observer. But yeah, it's a book basically about a lot of things which, when I've done shows with Brian Cox and on my own, there's a lot of scientific ideas which seem to give people a level of existential anxiety. And I wanted to write a book which was saying, here are the reasons these ideas can be delightful and not so scary.
And you're doing the Linda Smith lecture. What are you going to be talking about?
Well, I think I'm going to do the Linda Smith lecture on cancel culture because I read so much in the press about people being cancelled, and I've looked And I mean, I read something the other day that said comedians are scared to say anything now. Well, none of the comedians I know are. You know, one thing we are sometimes doing is we might be thinking about our jokes a little bit more. And I don't think, I think that I had a friend of mine, Barry Crimmins, who sadly died about 3 years ago, who's a real, incredibly passionate comedian and really fought against power as well. He wasn't punching down, he punched up. And he just said, you have to remember, words are shrapnel. Think about where you're firing them. And I think the best use of free speech is thoughtful, is going, hang on a minute, don't just chuck everything. Think about where you want to chuck something and why you want to throw it at that person.
I want to talk to you more about cancel culture, Robin, and some of your passions as well. But unfortunately, not here because we've run out of time. So can we continue this conversation on Patreon?
Well, why not? Let's do that.
That's what I'd hope. I hoped you'd say. Robin, thank you so much for joining me today. It's been a delight.
Thank you very much for having me. I'm sorry you discovered I'm overly verbose. 2 questions will do normally.
I've also discovered that you're my only guest who's had a milk bottle behind him.
Yeah, Jack Palance is just hiding behind that milk bottle, all ready for the craze marketing.
That's a reference to the film Craze, which we talked about before. That's it, lovies. Join me again at the same time next week when my guest will be the actor Anthony Keach. Now, he has a connection to this book, which I've held up before. And this is a book about Bela Lugosi's forgotten tour of Britain. He was here in 1951, the same year as the Festival of Britain. So that's going to be a fascinating conversation. Oh no, this is one for you, Robin. I nearly forgot. Later, I think August, my guest is going to be Ali Catterall. Is he another mutual friend?
Yeah, again, like he's one of those people that we communicate, because the last time we communicated, I think he might be working on a book about the Scala cinema. So we were going to talk about that, because that Scala cinema was what introduced me to the films of John Waters. 17 years old, a triple bill, Female Trouble. I think it was Female Trouble, Desperate Living, and of course, Pink Flamingos.
Of course. Well, in fact, he's making a film about the Scala with the former programmer Jane Giles, and we're looking forward to seeing that next year. But in the meantime, Robin, thank you again, and please, everyone, join me next week at the same time for me and Anthony Keach. Until then, this is David McGillivray saying, mwah. Bye.